There were 2 full-size beds placed underneath each one of the 2 bay windows. Kelly noticed that one of the beds had not been slept in, but there was a suitcase resting atop the naked mattress. It was opened. The large case was filled with neatly folded clothes and pajamas. The nighttime drawers were open and empty except for the King David Bible and a jar of Vicks Vapor Rub sitting on top near the busted brown lamp. The second bed was occupied by someone who suddenly began to cough repeatedly. Kelly crept his way across the cold linoleum floor to catch a glimpse of the ailing patient. The picture frame displayed on the dresser was the first thing that caught his attention. It was a family, but no one he knew. It was a father and his 2 daughters in front of the Magic Kingdom in Disney World. The frame that had housed the black and white photo looked rather old and dusty. Kelly noticed a wide arrangement of brown bottles with white labels that were lined up in a single row along the windowsill. He leaned in a little closer for further investigation when someone entered the room, causing him to fall directly over the sleeping elderly man. "They came in the middle of the night and took him without notifying me. I'm packing up his things now, and then I have to meet my sister to make the funeral arrangements," the young woman spoke into her cell phone. She sat on the second bed next to the suitcase that she snapped shut. She continued with tears in her eyes. "I just can't believe what they did to his brain. It looked like someone tore his scalp with a rusty, jagged kitchen knife. They thought that removing the tumor would relieve some of the pressure. Instead, those monsters killed him," she cried. The woman clicked end on her cell phone and headed for the door, but not before removing the dusty reminder from the dresser. Kelly assumed that the zombies must have taken the man from the picture. He started to lift himself off of the smelly old man beneath him when a horrible aroma violated his nostrils. The patient had soiled himself. "Oh, geez, mister, that was nasty," he proclaimed quite loudly. Kelly stood up and covered his nose. The old man rolled over onto his back, and for the first time since Kelly entered the area behind the metal buzzing doors, he was face to face with one of the residents. Kelly studied the old man. He had all of his teeth missing, and there were white sores all around his mouth. The old man's eyes were sunken deep within his sockets. They looked dark and lifeless. There were gray and black hairs sporadically growing around the brown lumps of flesh and the purple lesions visible on his scalp. Kelly leaned in towards the man's ear, the one with the deep gash that was leaking blood, and whispered, "Are you a zombie?" The fumes escaping from the rotten gorge that was the dying man's mouth reminded Kelly of death. He thought about his mother again. "Yes, and I am hungry for a little boy," the old man whistled through his gums. Kelly turned and darted for the door when the dying man started to get up from beneath the thin white sheets. He mimicked a brain-eating zombie climbing out from his earthly grave. The frightened little boy could hear an evil laugh interrupted by the sounds of uncontrollable choking coming from behind him as he raced into the hallway. He turned to the left and noticed the nurse's station at the end of the corridor. They would know what room Pappy was in. Then he could find his father and Grandma Elaine to warn them about the man that died when the zombies got his brains. Kelly thought that perhaps the scary old man might have been the zombie monster who ate him. That thought caused an eruption of fear to explode inside of him. He started to run. The worn-out bottoms of his sneakers almost caused Kelly to slip on the freshly waxed floor. "Whoa, little fella, what's the rush?" asked a man wearing a white lab coat. He was carrying a metal tray covered with a plastic green lid in one hand and a tiny white cooler in the other. "I gotta find my pappy before the zombies get him," Kelly responded, while trying to catch his breath. He brushed past the man and knocked the cooler from his grasp. Kelly stopped to apologize. He wanted to help clean up anything that may have spilled onto the floor. There was a slimy string of bloody red carnage that dumped from the refrigerated box. He looked up at the nurse's aide and asked, "Is that brains?" "Where's my food? I'm hungry," the old man demanded. He had limped his way out of the room and was standing facing them. Kelly turned the corner toward the metal buzzing doors. The hallway was dark, and he could hear violent screams bellowing from the recreation room. But he didn't hear the nurse's assistant yelling to him, "Hey, kid, it's just raw sausage for the kitchen. The tray is Old Man Nelson's prune juice and pancakes," he laughed. The low-hanging metal boxes that encased the fluorescent lighting were swinging from the ceiling. They flickered with patches of light, but Kelly still found it difficult to see clearly. He used his hands to guide himself along the wall to the open door of the recreation room. The large room that doubled as the dining hall was completely dark, except for the plasma television hanging on the far wall. There was a little boy on the screen, and he was running through the children's ward of a hospital, screaming for his mommy. He looked familiar to Kelly. The rotting corpse of the physician in the blood-splattered scrubs was chasing the child and repeatedly uttering, "Brains." It was Zombie Hospital, and the little boy was him. The frightened squeal that escaped from his lips awoke their hibernating viewers. Their eyes were affixed to the giant screen. It seemed to have them in a sort of trance. That was until they realized that dessert had just walked in. Suddenly, all of their attention had turned to Kelly. He could see the bloodlust in their eyes. The elderly woman with the long gray hair and bulging eyes, wearing the torn flannel nightgown, was the first to make a move. Kelly recognized her as Queen Martha, who used to host a local children's show. Martha didn't seem herself today, he thought. She had pushed herself out of the metal wheelchair with such a force that her ankle snapped. Kelly could see the exposed fibula bone that had ripped through her wrinkled skin. There was no blood, just like the zombies from the movie. Griff Dunbar, the only resident who would ever visit the children at Playcare and share cool stories of his days playing quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, was now dragging himself across the floor behind the Queen. The muscular legs that once catapulted his team to a Super Bowl victory were now being devoured by George and Betty Dingle. All that remained were the two grotesque stumps exposing his torn muscles and cartilage. He was salivating from his mouth. Brains. Kelly slowly started to back away with his arms behind him, feeling for the doorway. "Kelly, where are you?" Rachel hollered. Her voice filled the frightened young Kelly Reese with a sense of hope. The cold metal met with Kelly's tiny fingers. He turned the round knob. The recreation room lights were turned on just as the door behind him opened. Kelly stood frozen and lifeless. He felt as if someone had just torn his heart out. Standing before him were the mangled and rotting residents of Maple Creek Manor. Kelly thought that this would be the end of his journey. The zombies had won. He cringed when he saw the Dingles at the head of the lynch mob. George Dingle still had bits of chewed flesh dangling between his crooked and broken teeth. None of them moved a muscle or a bloodless limb, but instead the disfigured and diseased started to separate themselves from the rear. They seemed to be clearing a path for the person who had entered the room. "Kelly, I'm going to find you. I'm getting warmer." Rachel continued to holler in the distance. "How unfortunate that she never will," laughed a dark figure that was inching its way closer to Kelly. "Who are you?" he shouted. The figure seemed to be floating above the tiled floor as it came into view. "You don't recognize your own pappy?" the evil zombie laughed. Kelly fell backward into the open closet, but didn't fall directly to the floor. There had been something or someone that broke his fall. The liquid substance that covered his hands was warm and thick like a molasses. Kelly lifted them to the light. His childlike hands and forearms were dripping with human blood. "Zombies don't bleed," was the final thought that echoed over and over in his mind. The dark figure approached the cramped closet and spoke one final statement before allowing the cannibalistic tenants of Maple Creek Manor to feed off of their fresh carnage. It was simple. "Now my whole family is together." Pappy was the first to reach for his only grandchild. "Brains," was his final words. "Ollie, ollie, oxen free." "Kelly has to come with me," Rachel announced. She reached down and patted his blond curls. His hair was damp. Rachel noticed that he had been crying, too. "Are you all right, Kelly?" "I just had a bad dream is all." He sat up, pulled his knees toward his chest, and crouched against the wall. "Do you want to tell me about it, honey?" Rachel reached into the pocket of her flower-patterned smock to pull out a tissue. She gently wiped it across his forehead like his mother used to do. Kelly gave her a generous smile. "Nah, I'm all right. Just thirsty is all." "Well, let me find you a granola bar and a glass of juice, then." Kelly was relieved to be back in Playcare behind the leather chair near the entrance door with his friend Rachel McAllister. He had realized that it was not a very smart idea to wander off on his own and explore what lay beyond the buzz. He would just have to wait patiently until Pappy was feeling better. Then they would have their visit together. "Can you please make me a glass of fruit punch, Rachel?" Kelly politely asked. "Sure thing, sport, and I'll see about getting you some lunch," she added. Rachel was standing against the counter with her back to Kelly. She pulled a jar from the cupboard along with a loaf of bread. Then she opened the refrigerator door and pulled out a metal tray with a green plastic lid. It was the same type of tray that hosted Mr. Nelson's lunch in the dream. Finally, she grabbed a small white cooler from the bottom shelf and scooped something onto the tray before covering it back up. "I sure hope peanut butter and jelly is all right with you, Kelly," she asked. Rachel closed the refrigerator door. "Now go and wash your hands in the bathroom sink." "Yes, ma'am," Kelly replied. The bathroom was behind the chalkboard in the far corner of the room. He heard a familiar buzz from the kitchen. It sounded like the timer on the microwave oven. Or was it the metal door opening again and releasing the zombies? Kelly laughed at himself for thinking such a crazy thought. It was just a dream, he repeated as he dried his hands. He looked into the mirror to fix his hair. Kelly wanted to make a good impression on Rachel. His father had taught him some tricks on how to be a ladies' man. Kelly checked his breath and headed for the kitchen table. "Wow, it smells delicious, Miss McAllister. I sure am hungry." "What did you make?" Kelly was about to regret asking that final question because his once beautiful and perfect Rachel had transformed into one of the hideous and disfigured creatures from his dream. The skin on her face was peeling away at the cheekbones. Her teeth were charcoal black and brittle. Her silky hair had become frizzy and dry. It had fallen out in some places and draped around her neck. Her shoulder blades had dislocated and caused her left arm to hang lower than her right. Rachel was hunched over and drooling when she finally reached the table. The last thing that Kelly noticed as she threw the metal tray onto the table and lifted the plastic green lid was the skeleton-like hands that once were the soft caressing fingers that made him feel safe. "Brains," was her final words. Kelly could taste the sweat forming a tiny pool between the seal of his lips. The hot sun was reflecting through the squared windows. It made his face feel as if it was on fire. The leather seats burned against the back of his legs. Kelly had fallen asleep in the cab of his father's pickup truck. He opened his eyes, screaming from fear and pain. The sliding window between the cab of the truck opened. "Is everything all right, sweetie? You fell asleep just after we left. I didn't want to wake you up," said his grandmother. Kelly rubbed his eyes and answered, "Yes, Grandma, I am fine. Just really hot is all." He unlatched the back window to let in some fresh air. He propped his head against the tailgate and watched as the cemetery taunted him from the roadside. He was feeling a little queasy from the heat and the perspiration when the truck suddenly stopped at the gate entrance of Maple Creek Manor. "Hello, Mr. Nelson. How are things today?" my father questioned the old man, who was reclining and reading the latest issue of Newsweek. He stood up from his aluminum chair and walked around the booth to the electrical panel that was located on the stoned wall behind the rose bushes. Kelly realized that it was the same dying man from his dream. Mr. Nelson stopped to tip his hat to my grandma and offered her a fresh-cut perennial. "Afternoon, Miss Elaine." "Why, thank you, Charles," she called him by his first name. My father continued through the gates and past the old man in the black suit and tie. Mr. Nelson tapped on the window at the rear of the truck and remarked, "How are you doing today, slugger?" Ma Elaine told him once that I played second base for the Haven Ridge Little League. Kelly, despite his suspicion of the man, waved back to him. He could hear the old man hellishly laughing as they passed. Then it seemed as though his mind was playing cruel tricks on him. Kelly swore to himself that he heard an uncontrollable cough echoing from the cloud of dust left behind from the dirt road. The end.